Good evening, everybody, and welcome to my latest instalment, my Principles of Good Health. And this one in particular is focused on gut health. This week, on the 19th of May, is World IBD Day, a day to raise awareness of the impact of IBD conditions and how debilitating these types of conditions can be to your health. Now, I don't want to talk just about IBD tonight. I want to talk about the role of fibre if you've got an IBD condition, or whether you've got IBS condition, or whether you've got other digestive symptoms, or you just want to know how to keep your gut healthy. Then I'm sure you're going to find this of interest, because I don't think people understand enough about fibre and the different types of fibre and how they have a different effect in the gut. Now, because it is World IBD Awareness Day, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about IBD. It's a chronic inflammatory condition. There are two main types. One is known as ulcerative colitis, and the word ulcer gives you an idea of what's involved. Small ulcers get formed at the tail end, really, of the large intestines, the colon, predominantly in that area, but creates a lot of inflammation. And then we've got Crohn's disease, which can be patches of inflammation that can flare up and die down. The same with ulcerative colitis, actually. It's not always a flare-up type situation, and that can create inflammation anywhere in the whole length of the gastrointestinal tract, although very often it's found in the area where the small intestine joins the large intestine, the area known as the ileum. Now, the typical symptoms for people who may think they might have IBD, and I do want to state here that some of these symptoms may very well be IBS type symptoms, but the classic symptoms that may suggest there could be a sign of an IBD condition that may be developing is that really chronic diarrhea that's very, very loose, that doesn't really go away. There can be a lot of pain involved. There could be blood in the stools. And then alongside that, really over a period of time, it could result in weight loss that's unexplained and more tiredness. And over time, more symptoms can develop, depending on how much things are in flare-up and how much things are in remission. Now, do bear in mind that some of those symptoms, very often I find people have those types of symptoms. They've been to the doctor, they've had various tests done, and it's nothing to do with IBD. So I don't want you to panic about this. I'm just helping you understand the sorts of things that people with IBD conditions, if that's you may be living with. Now, if you have any concerns at all, if you think, oh my gosh, I might have some of those symptoms, I suggest you seek some medical advice. The first thing they should do is run a stool test to test for calprotectin, which is an inflammatory marker, and also for what we call fecal occult blood. That's blood you can't see with the naked eye. Depending on the results of that, and if inflammation is very, very high, they're likely to suggest a colonoscopy to really see what is going on side. But I'm sure most of the time that's not going to be the case. Now, what role does fibre play in IBD and IBS and just generally taking part in the gut? Now, most people, when we think of fibre, tend to think of roughage. And roughage very much is that, and I'll go on to talk more about that. But we have more than just roughage. Now, we think of roughage when we've got a concern about our bowel movements and if constipation's developing, and certainly in the older population, I think people think about roughage and eating bran, trying to keep themselves regular, that sort of transit time through the gut. But it's more complex than that, as you probably imagine I'm going to say, but I'm not going to say it's complicated, but it's a little bit more complex than that. But really, there are two main types of fibre. Let's keep it simple, two main types. We have insoluble fibre and we have soluble fibre, and this fibre is coming from our plant foods. So whether that's vegetables or fruit or our grains or nuts or seeds, this is where we're getting fibre from, because the fibre very much is found really in those sort of, predominantly, not always, but those tough sort of cell walls. We get different types of fibre. Now, whereas one type of fibre can be quite aggravating and irritating for those people living with an IBD condition when it's in a flare-up inflammatory situation, soluble fibre, on the other hand, can be very calming and soothing. So we can't treat fibre as just all one thing. And when I have clients with IBD conditions, they come to me because they get very, very confused about what they can eat and what they can't eat. And at the end of the day, for even with people with IBD conditions, having fibre in the diet continues to be important, but it's knowing what and when to put in the diet. So let's just talk about insoluble fibre. And this is the one that people classically call roughage. It's the fibre that adds bulk to the stools. It doesn't dissolve and absorb water into it. It can help transit time. It adds that bulk. It's why people relate it to that sort of constipation, because they think adding bulk is going to really, really help sort of encourage this movement through the bowel and out the other end. But for some people, that roughage, and you think about that word, it can be a little bit abrasive. Hence why, if you have IBD conditions and you're in that flare-up situation, it's an absolute no-no. You cannot go near insoluble fibre type products. It is very good for providing fuel to our beneficial bacteria, hence why, those with IBD conditions and all of us, we need to make sure we get an element of this in our diet really as much as we can, or all the time if we're not living with these conditions. So it really helps to keep the gut healthy, keep the microbiome in balance. Now, sources of insoluble fibre, if you're a bit concerned about what it is, where to get it from, or if you need to avoid it, it's that very much that sort of tough outer cell wall where we find it. That has that aggravating and irritating effect on the cell wall if it's inflamed. It shouldn't have that effect if there isn't inflammation going on. It should have a really positive effect. So things like what I call woody stems, those little tough woody bits when you buy a bag of kale, it's that type of thing. Maybe some tougher broccoli stems. Think artichoke, that's a really sort of tough food, isn't it? So that's very much very high in insoluble fibre. Skins, so skins on tomato, skins on apple, skins on potato, apples, pears, grapes even, that can be really quite aggravating. Whole nuts and seeds, in fact, little tiny seeds, if you've got ulcerative colitis, are an absolute no-no because of the ulcers. Just any inflammation. It's really, really not nice and irritating. Pulses. If you think of chickpeas and kidney beans, you think about those when they're dry, look how tough and hard they are. And even when they're well cooked, they've got that really quite tough outer shell, haven't they? Inside it's probably a lot more soluble, but that outer bit can be tough and insoluble. So that would be something you would have to avoid, and potentially lentils as well. Pips and seeds I've mentioned. Whole flax seeds again, and chia seeds wouldn't be great to have. Stringy fibres, you think about sort of the stringy beans, and sometimes you get stringy celery, that wouldn't be very pleasant at all. And tougher vegetables like cabbage and onion and sweet corn, you can just imagine, can't you, they're tough and fibrous. So those fibrous vegetables provide that insoluble fibre. And then whole grains. So the whole grain is great for fibre in that husk, but it's that insoluble fibre that will be very, very aggravating. So if you're eating whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, the brown rice, that's not going to be advisable if you've got inflammation going on in the gut. And then we come on to soluble fibre. Now, soluble fibre is much softer. It helps to draw everything together in the gut in a different way to insoluble fibre, and it creates this sort of gel-like consistency. So it draws water into the stool, it firms up very sort of soft stools, and really helps to encourage movement, but slows the movement down. Things don't come through too fast. It doesn't go too slow either, but it sort of slows things down, helps to cleanse the walls of the colon. It's much softer. It doesn't aggravate the walls of the colon. So if you imagine if you've got inflammation going on, you want to avoid the insoluble, but some soluble fibre, if you had IBD, would be much better to be having. It actually has a very positive effect on people with diarrhoea, soluble fibre, because of the way it can help to draw and form things together in a very soft way. It can really, really help for diarrhoea. And again, the fuel to feed our fabulous beneficial gut bacteria to try and keep everything in check in the gut. Now, soluble fibre may well be tolerated in an IBD condition, whereas insoluble isn't, but do be careful. You may be told, if you have quite severe IBD conditions, to avoid fibre altogether. And I have to work with individual clients to understand what is going on and what can be tolerated and what can't. But generally, a little bit of soluble fibre should be okay. And long term, with any sort of gut condition, we need to find a way to get fibre into the diet because it feeds the gut bacteria. It helps to create things called short chain fatty acids that feed the epithelial gut walls that can also help to calm, support the gut wall, have anti-inflammatory benefits, help the bowel movements, etc., etc. So it's getting that very fine balance. But here are some examples of soluble fibre. Now, my first love is stewed apple. Stewed apple is very rich in pectin. It's a lovely soluble fibre and it's very, very gentle, and it's been found to have an anti-inflammatory effect in the gut. So stewed apple is wonderful. No skins, no sugar, add a little bit of cinnamon, stew apple, keep it in the fridge, eat 2 to 3 dessert spoons every day. Whether you're in any sort of gut situation, it's wonderful for the gut and for any gut conditions. My absolute favourite. Some avocado should be okay as a soluble fibre. Skinless apricots, very rich in soluble fibre and very low in insoluble. Because just to say, there's usually a balance between both of these in any plant foods. It's finding the ones that are predominantly rich in soluble and not in insoluble. Cooked rolled oats. Don't cook them in dairy for different reasons. I'd go for a nut milk or even cook them in water. But if they're well cooked, they can be well tolerated as a soluble fibre. Sweet potato, particularly if it's mashed and no skin on it, can be great. And for some people, having things like milled flaxseed, ground, very finely ground milled flaxseed, can have a very positive impact on the gut and isn't irritating compared to when it's whole, when it's ground down really, really finely. Of course, if you're unsure, then start off with a very, very small amount. I'm sure your body would soon tell you if it doesn't like it. Now, other tips for eating fibrous foods, other than those I've just mentioned, if there was an IBD flare-up, you should really avoid, and the same for IBS conditions, if you're struggling with digestion, then I always say avoid raw vegetables. This time of year, especially in the summer, people tend to switch to salads. I get clients coming to me and there's no sign of any cooked vegetables in their diet at all. It sort of switches to salads. And while salads can be lovely, you are limiting your types of plant foods that you're eating. But also for gut conditions, any sort of digestive gut conditions, raw vegetables, raw salad is tough. So if you want to support your gut to digest your food, go for well-cooked vegetables. I don't mean to the extent that they're soggy, but a stir fry may not be the best thing to do. You want to steam your vegetables so they're well cooked. You could roast them, but they need to be well cooked. So this part of the digestive process has been done, because those tough plant cell walls will be broken down through the cooking process. It makes the whole digestion of them much, much easier. Stewed fruit like apples and pears, I just mentioned, obviously without the sugar. Tahini paste is very gentle and can be well tolerated. It's made with sesame seeds, but it's a paste, so you're not getting the tough little bits in there, so that can be good as well. And just to finish, there are 3 natural supplements I'm going to mention, and these do occur in my practice. I would say it's best to seek specialist advice for these, but I'm just going to explain what these are and why they can be helpful. Now, the first one is psyllium husk. I absolutely love psyllium husk in my practice. It's a natural soluble fibre. Tend to recommend it in capsules. It's just far nicer to take it that way than mix it with water and have it as a gruel. Lovely, the soluble fibres. It helps to create this soft form stools, absorbs water, helps avoid the diarrhoea, helps to cleanse the walls of the colon. very, very gentle on the gut wall, very, very gentle, and can support those bowel movements. And it's also been researched to have an anti-inflammatory effect in the gut, so that can be helpful. The second thing is a type of licorice called DGL. I can never pronounce the full name, but it's DGL licorice. It's been sort of modified in some way. Again, it's got a very powerful anti-inflammatory effect in the gut. Lots of research around it. Very soothing on the gut wall. Comprehensively researched to help with things like ulcers. But as I said, just this overall anti-inflammatory effect for the gut. And the final one is slippery elm. It's another favourite of mine in my practice. Slippery elm, I think the name sort of says it for itself. It coats and soothes and gently has a sort of healing effect on that gut mucosal barrier. It can really help with inflammatory conditions. It can really calm an irritated gut lining. Whether, as I said, whether it's IBD or just a little bit of inflammation that can occur alongside IBS type conditions as well. So slippery elm is just beautiful. That mucilaginous herb is what it's known as, for coating everything from top to bottom. So anyone living with an IBD condition, as I mentioned earlier, it's about trying to find ways to get fibre into the diet. Most people with IBD conditions go through remission and flare-ups. And when you're not in a flare-up situation, it's really trying to gently try to get more types of fibre into the diet, one at a time, a little bit from the soluble and a little bit from the insoluble, very slowly, one at a time, trying to work out what suits you and what doesn't. Because we need that fibre to feed the gut bacteria, and just to keep everything healthy, support the bowel regularity, bowel movements, cleanse the walls of the colon, support the gut barrier, etc., etc. But even when people do have a flare-up, there can be ways to get a little bit of soluble fibre into the diet. I usually have success with that with clients. And just keeping a little bit of soluble fibre, again, just helps to support the overall gut. Stripping out fibre in its entirety is not healthy for the gut, but it is creating this very, very fine balance that's important. So I hope that's of interest for all of you, not just to do with IBD conditions, although, as I said, it is World IBD Day, Awareness Day on Thursday. It's a really debilitating condition for people to live with. More needs to be done to help people like that. For example, toilets that people can access when they're out and about. But this is relevant for all of us to understand fibre, soluble, insoluble fibre, and why we need both types and what they do, what roles they have in the gut. I'll be back next Tuesday for Nutrition in the News. I then have a 2-week break for my holiday, but then I'll be back again with another topic that I will deliver to you. Remember to check out my YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health. Please go over and subscribe. And do drop a message if there are any topics that you'd like me to talk about in the coming weeks and months ahead. I'd love to know. Always on the lookout for things that are of interest to you. So thanks for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you.